All right, football at 4. Johnny Mac's in the house. He appears via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. Brought to you by the 2020 Men's and Women's MAC Basketball Championships. They're heading to Boardwalk Hall. They're going to be here soon, March 10th through the 14th. Visit boardwalkhall.com for tickets and information. We got football at 4. And, you know, sometimes football at 4, you start to put the topics you want to hit on the night before. And as I was doing so last night, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I saw this random bombshell, and I'm like, what? Where did this come from? The 17-game schedule. Yeah, we heard that. But where did the expansion of the playoffs all of a sudden come from, and how realistic is that, and when might it start? Let's bring our friend John McMullen at JF McMullen into the conversation and get his take on how realistic this all is, what it means. According to ESPN's Adam Schefter, John, the new CBA proposal is expected to include expansion of the playoffs. The other stuff we knew, but is this kind of a shock? Like, did this come out of right field? Is this something, as they were going back and forth, someone just randomly threw out there? Or had they been talking about this for a little while?
No, they've been talking about that for a while, and it was kind of known that it was going to be an expansion of the playoffs, just how you were going to do it. Not sure I like that, to be honest. I think one of the strengths of the NFL, as opposed to other sports, is it means something to make the playoffs, and the more you expand it, the less it means. So you're going to 7 teams now, essentially, on each side of the ledger. That's 14 out of 32. You're getting perilously close to 50%. That's 44%. So I don't know if I like it. The part I do like is it makes it even more valuable to get the number 1 seed, because that will be the only seed now that to buy. You have 3 wild card round games on each side and only 1 bye. So it becomes that much more important to be the number 1 seed, which would be a really significant advantage, even more so than it is now that you have 2 teams that have bye. So part of it's good, part of it's bad, but I know coaches will like it, because if you make the playoffs at 8-8, you can say, "Hey, I made the playoffs. I'm a playoff coach." So
yeah.
It kind of depends how you look at it.
Now, the thing is with this, where the other things on the table sounded like they would be starting next season, it sounds like they could expand the playoffs as close as recent as quickly as this very season. Correct?
Yeah, I think that's the plan. And I do think it's going to get done. I think it's going to get done before the new league year on March 18th. And I think we're going to have the new playoff format next year, next season. And then it remains to be seen how quickly they can ramp in the 17-game schedule. And that's key from a player perspective, because the big 47 to 48%, if you've been listening to the Sports Bash here at Football at 4, 48%, that was the number I gave you. That's what it's going to be. The players are going to get that split. And if they go to 17, which they will, it's just a matter of what year, then it kicks up to 48.5%. And that's significant money. Now, Adam Schefter tweeted out yesterday a shift of $5 billion, which is both correct and incorrect. I mean, people took that as a shift of $5 billion a year, which is laughable. $5 billion over an entire projected 10-year CBA, and that's with a 17-game CBA, and you're probably not going to get 17 for all 10 of those years. And by the way, the players should fight 10 years. They should not want to sign something that long, because as the revenues continue to increase, you can go back to the bargaining table quicker than that and get more money. So that's one of the things they have to haggle out. I know the NFL wants 10 years, but the players should really, really hold out and try to make it less than that, whether it's 5 years or 7 years.
All right, just a couple things on this that obviously need to be asked. Not a lot of us have really asked for additional playoff teams. We haven't asked for additional regular season games. So do we need these? Probably not, but they will certainly be immensely popular, correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The only reason they're having these games is because they can sell these games to TV, and that generates just astronomical revenue. Yeah, I think best case scenario, you stay at 16, you stay at the current postseason format, and you garner that money in a different way. But you can't do that. You just can't. I mean, those games are so valuable that they put so much on the revenue scale. That's why you're doing it. And players will be getting, as I said, 48% of that additional revenue, and 48.5% when you go to 17 games. So that's significant. You're talking upwards of $500 million a season, and you can do the math. $500 million divided by 32 teams. That's significant, and that's why it's going to be done.
Yep. And okay, do you look at the number 7 seed playing the 2 seed as bad football?
No, I don't think it's necessarily going to be bad football. I think on certain years, perhaps, if you do have a 7-9 team or an 8-8 team, which we've seen under the current format, very rare, but it has happened. So occasionally you'll get a really big mismatch, and it might turn into an awful game. But it is football as well, and it is more competitive, and it is any given Sunday, so to speak, and you see upsets all the time. So it's not like where you're going to see an 8 versus 1 in the NBA, perhaps, which is happened 2 or 3 times, I think, now, and one of them was the Sixers, but that was the year Derrick Rose ripped up his knee, and that's the only reason. And also, Joakim Noah got hurt in that series. So it was, strange circumstances. You never see 8s beating 1s. In the NFL, I don't think it would be that big of a mismatch. But occasionally, I think it will be bad. And as I said, I mean, you're getting a little bit too close to 50% of the teams making the playoffs. And then you start talking about devaluing the regular season. And we've talked a lot about that with other sports as well. I don't think it's as big as a deal in the NFL because there's so few games, and they still shape up to the fan base as events each and every week. But at some point, yeah, I mean, if you go too far, the playoffs and the regular season playoff spot becomes devalued, regular season becomes devalued. So those are potential unintended consequences down the road.
John, how does the uneven schedule potentially impact things? So you're used to 8 home games, 8 away games. You're used to potentially teams finishing 500. If and when this comes into play, how does that look?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one of the issues, and the reason why the NFL, from the owner's standpoint, wanted 18 games to make it more doable, more even keeled, and you can only get 17 as you're going back and forth in negotiations. And ultimately, I do think whenever it happens down the road, ultimately we will get to 18. But nonetheless, I mean, if you think about the NFL already, because it's a 32-team league that only plays 16 games, it's a tremendously unbalanced schedule anyway. So the schedule's never even. And we talk all the time about first place versus last place schedules and how drastic of an effect that could have on a team's success or failure from year to year. There are times you have to travel to London, and if you're not Jacksonville, you don't like that, and you're giving up a home game at times if you're designated at the home team. So it's not like this kind of stuff hasn't happened before. and by nature of the sport, as I said, it's never even. So I don't think that's as big as a problem. So however they cobble that out.
Now I don't know I don't know where Josh had read this, but I heard him say during Eitan's show today that they were going to rotate. 1 year the AFC teams would get the extra home game, and 1 year the NFC teams would get the extra home game.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you have to do, and that's the point. It can't be even by definition. But again, already it can't be even, and that's my point. It's when you have a 32-team league and you only play 16 games, that means everybody's not playing everybody evenly.
It would set up the opportunity to play a neutral site game, say in London or Mexico.
Yeah, and they could go that direction, but how many do you want to do that? And we've talked about the NFL placing a team in London or playing an entire season in London. So maybe they could work it around that. In other words, have a 16, well, then it would be a 17-game schedule, and you play each week in London, but it's rotating teams. You mentioned the other international sites. It'll be interesting. That'll be one of the interesting things at how they cobble that together. The NFL schedule makers already have a difficult job to begin with because it's such a quirky schedule, and this only is going to make it more difficult for them.
Are the players happy about this, and how much of a factor is the 48%, like that number that's giving the revenue share a significant amount more money to the players? Like, was that to make the players happy? Was that something that they're happy about or unhappy about? Like, how is that dynamic?
Well, it's like anything else in life. The ones who understand it are very happy, and the ones who don't are not very happy. And I've talked about this ad nauseum all the time. That's the only number that matters.
Real
literally.
Quick, John, I hate to break in here, but 6 minutes ago, Adam Schefter, the NFL has accepted the terms of the new proposal of the CBA. The NFL owners not unanimous in the approval of the CBA, but it appears that a new CBA has been agreed upon.
Yeah, well, the players still have to vote upon it, but from the owner's perspective, yeah, you only need two-thirds, and that was expected. And now I assume the players will agree as well. And this thing will get done, and that's good news to get it done before the start of the new league year. We talked about Alshon Jeffrey a little bit yesterday. So now, presumably, you'd have that post-June 1st designation, so that would help a little bit on players like that who have significant cap numbers that you could space out over 2 years. You weren't going to be able to do that if it were the final year of the CBA. But from Ryan's question, yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that matters. So you hear all this, and I've called it white noise consistently. These ancillary issues don't matter. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you use them as negotiating toys to get to that point, but that was the goal of the players, was to get to 48%, and they're getting to 48%. They prefer 50-50, but as I said, that's never going to happen. And they're actually going to get to 48.5% when they go to the 17-game schedule. So that's the only number that matters. The bad part, though, for the owners, some of the things that they had to give up, and the biggest one, less practices, less contact, and we've talked about that from the 2011 CBA, the difference between pre-2011, post-2011. The lack of practice time has made a game that's sloppier, and it's only going to get sloppier even more because there's going to be even less practice time.
Yeah, now, we talked about that earlier. Now, the NFL is putting this out there because of safety. The players, they would never say, hey, we want to hit more, right?
No. Well, occasionally your offensive lineman might say it, but that's about it. The majority of them, no, they don't want to hit more. And certainly late in the season, even offensive linemen don't want to hit. Mm-hmm. So, but I mean, already that kind of stuff would take care of each other. I think the bigger issue is training camp and There's going to be this 5-day ramp-up period where you can't have pads, you can't have contact. There's going to be less padded practices. In the regular season, you can only have 11 now.
Right.
That's how limited it is. So it's going to get sloppier. So get ready.
Okay, yes, you're right about that. Now, so the fact that the owners have agreed on this, which means the players will probably agree to it too, which means this is all going to happen. There's going to be more playoff teams this year. There's going to be 17 games next year, right?
Not necessarily. There's still a little bit, from last I heard, there's a little bit of a question mark if it's going to be 2021 or 2022 as far as the 17-game schedule. But it's coming either way. It's coming sooner
but
rather than
that's a part of the
later.
new CBA is that there'll be 7 playoff teams per conference, a 17-game schedule, and 3 preseason games, correct?
Yeah, which is good.
Now,
that part's
yes,
good.
that is good. But the question is then, do they start the season, the regular season, a week earlier, or do they take an extra week in between, or do they start the preseason a week late and give the coaches more training camp time to get ready for the first preseason game? So in other words, instead of the first preseason game being the first week of August, it's now the second week of August, and everything else stays in the same spot.
Well, I would imagine, and again, we'll have to see how it shakes out. I don't think they're going to move up or move back to regular season. I think they're just going to go an extra week. And then you talk about the preseason. Yeah, you would think you would kick back that first game, but it's not really going to affect – it's not going to give you more practice time. You might be on the practice field more, but the limitations that they're going to have built into the CBA are going to limit what you can do. So it's not really going to have a great effect either way. You're just going to have less padded practices, less hitting, less live reps, and that preseason game or no preseason game, it's still going to be that way.
Right. So real quick on the 17 weeks, was there 2 bye weeks or just 1 bye week?
Last I heard, there was only going to be 1 bye week, but that was still on the table until we see the final deal. We don't exactly know at this particular point, but I would imagine the actual details will continue to leak out. Not a big fan of 2 bye weeks. Players certainly want that, understandably so. But if you think about 16 versus 17 games, 1 bye week versus 2 bye weeks, why does 1 game add a bye week? I don't know. Again, you have to look at the calendar. You have to look at the back end of the calendar. Are you going to eliminate that off week before the Super Bowl and after the championship games? If you are you going to go back to playing the Pro Bowl after the Super Bowl? I mean, nobody's interested in it now when things are still going on. They'd be even less interested if it happened after the Super Bowl. So those are questions that still need to be answered. But my last I heard, it was only going to be 1 bye week, but players were certainly fighting for 2.
Gotcha. Any concern, it doesn't sound like it, but just from your perspective, concern over the dilution of the product? Thursday night, Sunday afternoon, Monday night, now an extra week, more playoffs. I know no one's going to complain about the more playoffs, but XFL, any concern that there's just too much football out there, or is that just laughable?
Well, I've talked about that a lot. I mean, in theory, you would say there has to be a tipping point. There's been a tipping point in Major League Baseball, which at one time was more popular than the NFL. Young people probably don't realize that, but at one point it was significantly more popular. There was a tipping point in the NBA. There's certainly been a tipping point in the NHL. everyone says there's a tipping point. I haven't seen evidence of it. I mean, people love the NFL. I do question, as I said, once you get to you're getting too perilously close to 50% of this league making the playoffs, and that to me devalues the playoffs. So you say that's a playoff team. Well, all of a sudden, what does that mean? If you're a 7 seed, that's not as important. Now you say, well, there were 6.
Chip Kelly would have made the playoffs 2 years then.
Yeah, I mean, someone went back and looked, and I don't know why, but the Steelers would have made the playoffs
4 more times,
consecutive years. Yeah. But they weren't a playoff team last year. Certainly not from a standpoint. A lot of it obviously had to do with injuries at the quarterback position. On the other hand, the Rams would have been the team on the NFC, and that was certainly a talented team, and we're in the Super Bowl the year prior. I don't think they would have been embarrassed in a playoff-type situation. So I think it will be individual years and who makes it and how things shake out and how deep the particular conferences are. But I do think at certain times you're going to see some pretty bad teams making the back end there in the playoffs.
All right, last one for John McMullen. We kicked this around earlier, and I know we're all excited about the XFL. It seems to be doing well. The ratings were pretty good. We were throwing around the possibility of the XFL playing a game in a primetime situation, a Sunday night game, a Monday night game. Is that something that you think could work?
Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't work.
Like XFL, Monday Night Football.
Yeah, especially, I mean, the championship game, maybe down the road could be in prime time. I do think, though, you're in a totally different stratosphere when you're talking about primetime television, and you really got to deliver, or it's not worth it. And I think it's smart to start where they have, because, you know, there were a lot of people talking about the TV ratings this week, and there's some stories, and even Sports Illustrated put a story that the ratings were bad. And I said, people just don't understand the modern television landscape. I mean, the TV people were thrilled. The FS1 people were astonished. They did, I think, 1.35 million. They were expecting under 1 million viewers, significantly under 700 to 800,000, and they did 1.35 million, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're talking about FS1, that's a home run.
Yeah, man.
And
just to put in some comparables, on NFL Network, AAF was getting 400,000 or somewhere in that range.
Yeah. And then you, from that standpoint, you start talking about versus other sports, and college basketball. It's beating college basketball every week. It's beating. Now, last week is a little bit different because you had the Daytona 500, which is obviously huge, and you have the NBA All-Star festivities, which is huge for cable ratings. But just regular NBA games, just regular NHL games, they're beating it. And they're beating it in 18-49.
The St. Louis one was wild, John, that they doubled the Blues. The Battlehawks doubled the Blues.
Oh, yeah. They're in the local ratings of the teams. Yeah, they're killing the NBA and NHL teams in those particular cities, which is pretty amazing. It really is.
Yeah. John McMullen, Football at 4. Of course, we do it every day. Tomorrow we'll be back. We've got plenty more. We'll see if the players, they're supposed to have a conference call tomorrow, and we'll see what they think about playing 17 games. But it looks like you're going to get an extra playoff team this year, 7 in the NFC, 7 in the AFC, which means really at the beginning of a year, you know, especially in Philly, like you should feel like you're going to make the playoffs almost every single season. You might miss it one random time, but at least if there's 7 teams, the Eagles are constantly have been in that mix, it seems like, every year for such a long time. So I guess that part of it feels pretty good, especially, you know, if you love playoff football like we all, you know, you want to see your team get in the playoffs no matter what. But it also will be that whole conversation of, well, if you get in the playoffs, is that false hope because you're really not all that good? We were talking about that this year with the Eagles team.
Yeah, to really 2 years in a row.
Yes.
And we talk about, I've often cited Doug Peterson making the playoffs 3 consecutive years. That's a very significant thing to do in this league. Not a lot of teams have done that. Now that becomes less impactful. If you start making postseasons, your 7 seeds, it's not going to mean as much.
Yeah, we keep watering it all down for the young kids there, John.
You got to keep the attention span. No attention span.
John McMullen, like all guys, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Thanks, pal.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, I'll be back tomorrow. Football at 4 right here on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN.